Good evening and thank you for joining us for The Spotlight. I'm David Rose. Kid criminals. I never thought in a million years I'd be putting those two words together. Kid criminals. They just don't seem like they go together. But this is the reality we have right now. Children as young as 12 years old committing violent felony crimes with disturbing frequency. And yet the data would suggest a different story, a dramatic drop in the number of youth offenders arrested, and even fewer actually facing a judge. So what is really going on? Tonight we shine the spotlight on the juvenile justice system. You might be surprised to learn the state of Washington is seeing a remarkable reduction in youth offenses overall. In 2019, more than 11,300 kids were arrested. But in 2020, arrests dropped to 6,900. And then last year, just 4,600. That is a nearly 60% decline from 2019. Now, extra credit for viewers who guessed COVID, cop shortage, and police reform as possible contributors to that data. But what about prosecution? While we're seeing a drop in the number of arrests, there are far fewer prosecutions. The Spotlight has obtained brand new referral numbers from the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office for kids who committed the most serious crimes like robbery and assault. Last year, there were 202 referrals for charges in King County for violent crimes. 2020, 401. 2019, pre-pandemic, there were 479 cases prosecuted. Overall, between 1998 and 2021, the number of referrals from law enforcement dropped 91%. Violent crime referrals specifically dropped 68% in that same time period. We'll take a closer look at the why behind kid crime a little later. But first, some recent concerning examples. While most kids are in class on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 kids were out stealing cars, including one at gunpoint. Seattle Police Captain Jim Britt was in Renton testing out a new license plate reader on his patrol car before his shift when he saw that it had pegged a stolen Elantra, stolen out of Redmond. Well, the driver turned out to be 13 years old. He refused to stop when Captain Britt turned on his police lights, so he backed off. He notified Bellevue Police, who spotted the Elantra that had been abandoned at that point.
There was someone in their backyard that they could see on the surveillance cameras. Our officers made contact with that individual, determined that that suspect was involved with the stolen car that we had just recovered. To have juveniles of this age involved in violent criminal activity, it's, in my 25 years, the first time I've ever seen anything like it.
The 13-year-old was arrested, and they learned that he was with 3 15-year-olds who had jumped out of the Elantra and then carjacked a driver in Renton at gunpoint. Because the driver was suspected of committing a violent crime at that point, the police pursuit was on.
K31 southbound passing Southeast 58. Looks like his car is smoking really bad. Looks like looks like one or both tires in the rear are gone.
3 15-year-old carjacking suspects in a stolen Dodge Charger try to escape from Bellevue Police.
Making the next right here, going in. Looks like we're getting ready to bail. Okay, I got the driver. Driver's bailing out. Driver's wearing like a brown shirt, and looks like they're bailing into the woods. Go straight off the nose of the car into the woods there. Get K9 here.
At this point, officers don't know their ages. They only know they're considered armed and dangerous after stealing the car at gunpoint.
I got 2 on my camera right now. I'm sticking with the driver at the moment.
The third suspect was still in the Charger.
What do you want? Stand by. We got one in the car in the back of the vehicle.
Okay, I got the other 2. You guys handle your stop.
The teens who ran hunker down in what they think is a good place to hide.
They've gone to ground. I've got 2 on the ground at Coal Creek Trail. They're right in the bottom of that trail, the bed there.
The first officer to follow them radios for help.
7.20 to Guardian. If you see me walking, how close am I to them?
You're about 50 feet on the trail. Let's back off. Let's do this the right way. You shouldn't be a single officer out there chasing these guys. Let's back off. If they're armed and dangerous, let's do this the right way.
Another officer quickly joins him. The other 2 people you see there are hikers who just happen to be on the trail.
I can't tell what they have in their hands. We need to make sure you guys have cover down there.
The officers can't see the suspects through the trees.
They're basically underneath that tree where you're at. Just off to the east a little bit.
While a perimeter is set in case the suspects take off, a K9 team and SWAT arrive.
Everyone, you guys are pointed right at them.
After some negotiation and the sounds of a K9 eager to be released, the suspects decide to surrender.
We got movement. We got movement. Come on up.
Well, put his hands up, coming up the hill.
Everyone there still climbing up to officers appear to be compliant.
As the first suspect reaches the officers with his hands up, they take him to the ground and cuff him.
Everyone, they're detaining one, still compliant. I got the other one. He's got his hands on his head.
Then the second suspect is ordered up the hill, and he's taken to the ground as well.
Copy, 2 in custody, and start breaking down perimeter.
A wild police chase comes to a peaceful end for two teens who should be in school, not playing the latest version of real-life Grand Theft Auto.
K-9-1 to Guardian 1, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
So after all of that, here's the kicker. Police had to let the 13-year-old and the two 15-year-olds go free because they couldn't prove that day that they were involved in the carjacking. Renton police need more time to investigate before sending charges to the prosecutor's office. Until then, those three juvenile delinquents are back on the street, just like the 5 teens arrested in Pierce County after a night of criminal mayhem.
This is messed up.
This is police body cam footage from Edgewood. Pierce County Sheriff's deputies gathering evidence after 5 teens shattered the windshields of cars in the parking lot of an apartment complex. Witnesses saw them jumping on the hoods to dent them, even breaking out the side windows. The vehicles vandalized include a 2022 Mercedes, a BMW, and 7 other cars, totaling more than $5,000 in damage. Pierce County Sheriff Sergeant Darren Moss says they were driving a stolen Hyundai, and it was the second time recently that one of the suspects, a 16-year-old girl, had been arrested for similar crimes. A judge released all of the teams who did all of this damage on curfew monitoring, meaning they have to be home by a certain time. That's laughable, considering if they had been supervised properly in the first place, they wouldn't be out there committing these crimes. Darren, I look at this video from body cam footage that you provided, and I see all these smashed up windows. I just think about those people that came out and saw their cars, what that reaction must have been like to see their stuff vandalized. And it just seems senseless. It's the middle of the night. Kids should be home in bed. They should not be out running the streets. What happened in this case?
Our deputies got a call of vandalism at an apartment complex in Edgewood on January 2nd. When they got out there, they saw windshield smashed. They saw a passenger window broken into. The kids stole a wallet out of that vehicle and had that woman's driver's license and credit cards on them when they were detained. The kids left the area, but we had a great description of the vehicle and a license plate, which helped us to let other agencies in the county know what we were looking for. They ended up being found by Puyallup police and fled. They had to stop their pursuit. And then Bonnie Lake police found the vehicle and it fled from them as well, but ended up crashing, and we were able to take all 5 juveniles into custody. Those kids were 15 and 16 years old, every single one of them. It's just really frustrating when you're seeing juveniles, younger kids, committing these crimes.
Do any of them, when you actually put handcuffs on them, realize they are actually in hot water? Are these kids just hard as nails today?
I was at an incident last year where the kids we never were able to find the victim, but basically another witness saw him point a firearm at another 9-year-old girl. And it basically was a robbery. We don't know what was taken, but another witness saw them with the gun, and we arrested the 3 teens that they did have guns on them. 2 of them had firearms. And I talked to one of the kids and just expressed how serious it was and how this is not something that's going to help them in the future. And he seemed scared at first, but he was willing to listen to me. I don't know how much that's going to help that individual kid, but I think a lot of these kids are missing the guidance.
Up next, some other wayward juvenile offenders, among them a real teen prodigy when it comes to criminal behavior. Car theft, it seems to be as common as the rain in some of our communities. But this next story in our spotlight has a surprising twist. One of the prime suspects is barely old enough to drive. Here's the Spotlight's Alejandra Guzman.
All right. Yeah, this is where they came in at, so they just busted the whole window out and helped themselves in.
Surveillance cameras captured 4 people breaking into 360 Motors in Kent.
They was probably in there maybe 5 minutes, so they just grabbed the keys, went outside, picked which car they wanted, and drove off.
Owner Tremel Anderson says this is his 4th theft, but this was the worst of it. The crime reported just 5 hours after the new year.
Everybody's bringing the New Year's in. Yeah, wake up to this.
4 cars, a BMW, Lexus, Cadillac, and an Escalade, gone off his 30-car lot. And that's not all. He says another car was taken just a few hours after the first theft.
Why this little place, man? It's like I'm just a little car lot.
Auburn police say someone reported an unlicensed car parked on the street. It came back as stolen and were able to track it down to 2 women, a 26-year-old and a 16-year-old, who officials say is a prolific car thief, accused of stealing at least 50 cars in the last year.
It is alarming. Obviously, when you see the age, that is such a young age.
Police say the teen targeted residential areas around Auburn, taking them as people left them running while warming up.
In most cases, it takes just a few seconds for someone to steal these vehicles.
Both women's homes were searched. Police found more than a dozen set of keys to stolen cars. They were arrested and booked for burglary and car theft. Police say charges can stack up against the teen as the investigation continues. The 26-year-old was in court today. Prosecutors argued she'd be held on $10,000 bail, but a judge released her.
4 out of the 5 stolen cars have been found and returned to the lot. 1 already in the body shop, and this one found with just barely any visible damage, just a nick to the front bumper. And this one, the taillight just barely dinged, but it's what he found inside that he says is most troubling.
It just looked like they're just stealing, because I found in the back seat of one of the cars that I'm cleaning out like numerous of people's mail. I found this in the back seat of the 2016 BMW, and like they actually had their kids in the car.
The thefts costly for the small business owner facing trying times.
As soon as we started taking a couple steps forward, we're taking a step through back.
Cars are a high-value target, or at least worth it to teens to risk arrest for a joyride. But when kids are committing the crime, sometimes the take doesn't compare to the threat. As the Spotlight's AJ Janabel reports, investigators say a group of teens robbed 2 children at gunpoint. All they got away with was a few sandwiches, but they left behind 2 terrified young victims.
Around 7 in the evening, 2 children dealt with something no kid should ever face. Investigators say that an 11-year-old girl and a 13-year-old girl were making their way home right around this area with a couple sandwiches. That's when they say one of the little girls felt a metal object believed to be a gun pointed against her back. The suspects, all wearing masks, believed to be teens, only got away with a few dollars worth of subs.
The thing that's really concerning is we're seeing more and more violent crimes being committed by younger people now.
Here are just a few recent incidents that we've seen. Last week, police arrested 5 teenagers accused of robbing a man in Seattle, then driving away in a stolen car and hiding in a Federal Way mall. In October, investigators say armed teens followed a mom home and carjacked her in Spanaway. And back in April, a 15-year-old and 16-year-old faced murder charges after allegedly killing a beloved pot shop employee in Tacoma.
And that's the last thing we want, is to have our younger generation starting off on the wrong foot and getting in trouble at an early age.
Sergeant Darren Moss with the Pierce County Sheriff's Department says a challenge with this crime trend is a law that went into effect in 2022 that slows down the investigative process.
We are no longer allowed to interview juvenile suspects in any criminal cases without having a lawyer present for them to talk with first.
As these crimes become more common, Moss says something needs to change.
How do we get kids to stop thinking that this is a good idea to go out there and robbing people or picking up guns or stealing cars?
Coming up, trying to understand the why behind kid criminals, and one of the people fighting to keep them out of jail even when they've done wrong.
You walk into court and the defendant sitting across the courtroom from you is this kid whose feet don't even touch the ground. And then you learn about their social history and the environment that they're growing up in, and sometimes, it can be heartbreaking.
That's Jimmy Hung. He is the Chief Deputy Prosecuting Attorney for King County's Juvenile Division. He's a proponent of King County's controversial restorative justice and diversion program that keeps juvenile suspects out of jail and court while trying to get them the services they need so they don't reoffend again. That program is intended to help first-time offenders, but he also wants to hold teens accused of violence accountable. And the recent trend doesn't look good.
We are seeing a increase in more serious crimes. So especially over the last, I would say, 24 months. And that is not surprising as well, because we're seeing that in the adult system as well. And the reality is that these children who are committing these crimes, there are adults in their lives too. And the pandemic had its impact on all of us, and it puts a lot of stress on our whole society. And it's put, I'm sure, stress on the adults who are supposed to be watching these kids, supervising these kids. There are fewer opportunities for these kids to engage in the community, and unfortunately, we're dealing with the consequences of that right now.
Well, in all the gnashing of teeth and frustration about kid criminals out there putting everybody in danger, how do we fix it? Well, there is one strong voice of hope. Sean Good has been the executive director of Seattle-based Choose 180. It's a youth justice group seeking to replace prison and prosecution with reform and restorative practices. He also served on the board of the Washington State Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice. That's a key policymaking group with statewide impact. I asked Sean if the laws are being too lenient on kids now so that they fear no consequences. Essentially, if they commit violent crimes, shouldn't they be locked up for their safety and ours? He had some interesting stats that he says explains why that doesn't work.
There's plenty of data that shows us that when a young person touches a courtroom, they're over 50% more likely to end up in front of a juvenile court judge again. If a young person spends any period of time in juvenile detention, they're at times upwards to 60 to 70% more likely to end up in juvenile detention again. If the rate of return and our practice of attempting to curb behavior through these historical practices has demonstrated that they're unsuccessful, then we really have to begin to imagine what else is possible. And because there's organizations like ours and others that are doing these types of restorative practices that are having a much greater effect and a greater impact, our imagination doesn't have to be too big. And I think there is a way forward. It's a both and approach. We simultaneously can't have young people causing harm in community and being a risk to themselves and others. And we also can't rely on systems that haven't produced the outcomes that we're looking for to somehow magically produce something different if we resource them better.
I'm hearing from detectives that a lot of these kids, when they are arrested or they talk to them and they get the evidence, they see, Snapchats between them, messages between them bragging about what kind of car they're going to steal or what they're going to do that day. How much of an influence is this social media stuff having on encouraging these kids to do bad things?
Well, I mean, if you ask Seattle public schools or Kent schools, right, they'll tell you that there's a direct correlation between the behavior of young people and what's happening on social media. I mean, think about what it was like when we were younger, right? Whenever that is, for the folks that are listening, like when you were younger, we could just start with the baseline for me. When I was in high school in the 90s, my peer group were the people who I would be around day in and day out. There wasn't this extended network of young people who I was trying to keep up with or compare myself to or be validated by. It was the group of people who were showing up on that school campus every day. It was much more confined. That's not the case anymore. And when you have young people who are navigating esteem issues because of these exacerbated mental health issues that have gone unaddressed, it's no surprise that they're looking for validation through their peers. And sometimes it shows up in a way that's incredibly harmful and toxic. And that's what manifests when we're talking about the types of cases that have surfaced recently. Like, there is a direct correlation between the mental health, the well-being of our young people and these behaviors that are showing up that are causing harm.
If you are a parent dealing with a troubled kid, Sean says they can help. Just go to choose180.org for all the details on the programs they offer. Well, if there's a war for our kids' attention, we are losing it. A new attempt to unplug children from harmful influencers when we come back. Well, get this. Currently, the average American teen spends between 7 and 9 hours a day on their device. The average. A good portion of that total is social media, of course. Our kids being swayed by influencers in ways good and bad. The TikTok trends alone have resulted in multiple memes of destructive behavior. Well, if you can't beat them, sue them. The Spotlight's Frankie Thompson has word of a unique lawsuit filed on behalf of our local kids.
Seattle Public Schools filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court against the companies that own Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. In the complaint, the district blames the companies for worsening kids' mental health and behaviors.
The key that I think is coming from these lawsuits and from this public awareness is a desire to get these organizations to, one, acknowledge the issue, and two, begin internally developing and designing their apps to address the issue.
The documents say SPS surveyed its schools in 2022 and found social media played a significant role in the increase of rowdiness in the classroom, tardiness, students skipping class, using electronic devices when not permitted, bullying, physical fights, and threats of fights. The district says the study also revealed more students are experiencing depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. Child health and development experts say social media algorithms fuel those negative feelings. In a statement, SPS says the increase in suicides, attempted suicides, and mental health-related ER visits is no coincidence. As alleged in the complaint, this crisis was already growing before the pandemic, and research has identified social media as playing a major role in causing mental health problems in youth. During his annual report, State Superintendent Chris Rakedal says suicide numbers among youth have reached pre-pandemic levels, and he says students are exposed to some of the darkest content on social media.
There is something profoundly different about being a young person on planet Earth today. And if this lawsuit sheds light on that, and if the industry asks itself hard questions on how to double down on protection of young people, I think that's good. I will also say I think there's evidence that the industry's done a lot to try to help in this situation.
Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of The Spotlight. Until next week, be smart and stay safe.